Hi, good afternoon and good morning to all of you. It's webinar Agendashift Debrief by my Burrows. So let's get started. So it starts from the webinar agenda. First, we'll give you the introduction about the innovation roots. Then we'll go through the logistic required for this webinar. Then we'll talk about the mic Burrows. Then I'll hand over a mic to Mike talks on Agendashift Debrief. Then hopefully we have a question and answer session. So, introduction to innovation groups. So, we are a skill transfer journeyman and trusted consulting provider of strategic methodology, technology advisory, and solutions to enterprise building the largest and innovative solutions. So, these are the services. We do provide agile consulting and coaching. We also provide agile training in-house and public. So these are the logistics required for this webinar. Please use a LAN cable for joining this webinar. Wi-Fi connection are unstable. Use high quality speakers or headphones for better sound quality. Please keep your microphone mute. Question will be taken via Q&A chat box. Please enter your all question in the Q&A chat box. The webinar will be recorded and will be uploaded in YouTube on the Innovation Roots channel. So this is about the Mike Burrows. Mike is the author of Kanban from the Insight, the first values-based treatment of the Kanban method based on his experience as an interim CTO for a late-stage startup. He is a founder of Agendashift, the home of an integrated set of online workshop-based and coaching tools for a growing community of lean agile transformation practitioners. Prior to these roles, he was the executive director and global development manager for a top-tier investment bank. So over to Mike.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to just take the screen. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
You can. That's good. Oh, I'll start it then. So first of all, I've been introduced already. I'm, probably best known as the author of Kanban from the Inside, founder of Agendashift. A couple of other things you may remember me for: Feature Ban, the Kanban simulation game that I've run a few times over in India, and lots of people have used around the world. A couple of new tools that I've open sourced: Change Ban, which is a lean startup inspired variant of Feature Ban, and 15-minute FOTO, which is a coaching game that we'll see a little bit of later. So just about what the Agendashift debrief actually means, what this presentation actually means. A few weeks ago, I and Patrick Stayat ran a 2-day workshop in Bengaluru just after Lean Kanban India. So that was a very exciting, intense 4 days for us, 2 days of conference, 2 days of workshop. Patrick ran his flow lab on day 1 of our workshop. I ran Agendashift for day 2 of the workshop. And we took care to produce photographable artifacts from each of the exercises in the second day, in the Agendashift day. And I'm going to be presenting those today as a way of explaining really how the workshop works. Agendashift, it's a coaching and leadership framework for lean agile transformation. And there's this sort of activity flow. This is the activity flow of the workshop, and the workshop's in 5 sessions: discovery, exploration, mapping, elaboration, and operation. But it's also a very good model for how continuous transformation operates in a business that really understands how to keep change moving all the time. There's also, you'll see on the right, a true north statement and 5 principles as well, and we'll come to those. And so what you're seeing here in front of you are 3 of the 4 main elements of Agendashift. The 4th element is the assessment tool, and you'll see a demo of that in the course of the presentation. We take our inspiration from a wide variety of sources in and around Lean Agile. So you'll see some things that you'll recognize, some traditional things like Lean and A3, some newer things like Cynefin, clean language, impact mapping, user story mapping, and so on. So a nice mixture of old and new, and some things that you probably won't have seen before. The thing I want to stress is the way it is very outcome centric. Just as with the original book Kanban from the Inside, I initially stressed it's being values based. I found it's actually much more useful to stress that it is outcome oriented. That really is its distinguishing feature. And if you've got agreement on outcomes, then you're in a very good place. The question now is just how. And that's very different from starting with a solution and wondering how you're going to persuade people to adopt your solution, wondering how you're actually going to go through the pain of implementing that solution, and so on. I'll skip over the principles for now. That really leads to the really fundamental question about what is an appropriate way of introducing Agile or introducing Lean Agile into an organization. And is it through the traditional change project, or is it better to actually to model what continuous transformation looks like, and to model that from the very beginning? Clearly, I think the thing on the right hand side is more appropriate, where you're exploring needs, agreeing on outcomes, generating options, and making progress by testing your assumptions. And that's actually a great way for organizations to make progress, and so much healthier, I think, than starting with a business case and a complex solution, enduring a painful implementation, and then living with the consequences, and realizing that you haven't achieved everything you wanted to achieve, and meanwhile the world has moved on without you. I think that's a model that may be appropriate in some circumstances, but one that's very hard to justify when your goal is to, when your goal is around Lean and Agile, where we want to maximize and model iteration, collaboration, respect for people, and so on. So Agendashift is a way of providing that kind of model, a model for coaching and leading transformation. So onto the workshop. We're going to start with the discovery session. That's the first session of 5 in the day. 5 main tools that we use. There's an exercise called celebration, and in brackets 5W. So the celebration is like a remember the future exercise. It's one of those time travel exercises where we put ourselves some months into the future and think about what the world might be like at that time in the future. Another tool we use a lot right through the workshop is 1, 2, 4, all. This is a very important facilitation pattern. The idea that we give everyone the opportunity to reflect on their own, then work in pairs, then in small groups, and then those small groups sharing around the room. And we use that as a reflection tool, we use that as a prioritization tool, and so on. Very important. We'll see that true north that I quickly skipped over in the introduction. We'll look at that in more detail. Then an exercise called 15-minute FOTO. So this is the one that I open sourced only this week, actually. So I've been working with Andrea Chow, who's another Agendashift partner, to productize the game that we've been using in our workshops for the past year or so. And the outputs of that game we will organize just into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. That's the SML at the bottom stands for. So the celebration, we're going to jump straight to the outputs. So the 5W are that's the 5W who, what, when, where, why questions. We've transposed the where and the when here. That was my mistake, not anybody else's, and a mistake that we fixed and won't make again. But the idea is we are exploring the celebration that we're going to have after the end of a very challenging period of months, but where we have spectacularly over-delivered on expectations. So we're now thinking about who should be celebrating, what it is that we're celebrating, where we're going to do that, when exactly that is, and why we bothered. Why did we go through all that pain? Why were we motivated to to address that challenge, and so on. So although this is ostensibly about the celebration, what we're actually doing is establishing some really important business context to the rest of the day. And this is something that often gets missed. We often start just with some training without context, and then people are left scratching their heads, wondering why they're being trained this, how this is going to be used, and so on. Instead, we're starting with a much sort of healthier activity that's about engaging people, and also one that gives the facilitator, the coach, the consultant, whoever is running the exercise, the opportunity to learn some valuable things about the organizational context that they're working in. So we've got some nice outputs here. If we just look at the where, for example, in one group, 75 participants, people have been working on this project to get together in a hotel to celebrate. Over on the other side, forest, fire, camping, nature, they want the opportunity for people to meet not just the workers on the project, but to have their families around the barbecue as well. And really recognising the wide sort of scope of people that are contributors to the project, either directly or by supporting the people involved in the project as well. I won't go into more detail about the specific scenarios that they discussed, but you can see how this exercise has helped them really explore who's working in it, the scope of the work, relationships between people, suppliers, customers, organisation, and so on. So that's the 5W exercise. The next exercise is the True North exercise. I'm going to give people, I could give them a choice. They've achieved the spectacular, or they're about to achieve the spectacular accomplishments. They got some challenge ahead of them, and they can do that in one of two ways. They can spend 20 hours a day working in their office, eating delivered pizza, drinking heroic quantities of coffee, sleeping under the desk, and so on. Or they can take what is perhaps the more radical path, the one in which everyone is able to work consistently at their best. Individuals, teams, between teams, across the organisation, where the right conversations happen between the right people at the best possible moment, where needs are anticipated and met at just the right time. So you may sort of get a sense of some lean and agile ideas in there, and that is very, very deliberate. But I try not to make it too explicit, too obvious. We're not teaching agile, we're not teaching lean here. We're giving people the opportunity to get a taste of what it might be like. And that is the first question we ask, what's that like? If it was like this for you, how would it be different? And sometimes when I've run this in private workshops, in situations where there is a sense of people being overburdened, for example, or where people operate too narrowly within their silos, they can find it a cathartic experience just to reflect on how different it would be if more of this was in place in their organisations. That's, again, a very nice place to start. So some healthy look at business context and a healthy look at how things could be. Then we ask them to come up with a list of obstacles. So what stops this being more true? And they'll write down a list of obstacles, perhaps a dozen of them. And then we use this exercise on the right, 15-minute FOTO, and FOTO stands for from obstacles to outcomes. And they have 15 minutes to flip those obstacles into outcomes. So start with an obstacle, and it might be silos, for example, and simply ask the question, what would you like to have happen? And people will pause for a moment, and then they'll come up with something that they would like to happen. They'd like to see better cooperation between teams, for example. And you can ask, and when there's better cooperation between teams, then what happens? And they will give their answer to that. So they play this in their small groups. They're holding a card in their hands that has these questions on them, and they are learning how to coach each other using these clean language questions. And they will turn that list of obstacles into perhaps 30 different outcomes that they would like to see. So already, just an hour maybe into the workshop, we've already generated a substantial list of things that they would like to see brought about, things that they would like to help bring about. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've just open sourced this exercise. If you go to www.agendashift.com/resources and look for 15-minute FOTO there, you will see that you can download PDFs of the cue card and of the deck directly. And if you get in touch with me, and there's a link on the page, you'll be able to get hold of the original source PowerPoint, so you can make your own adaptations as necessary. I only released this on Tuesday, and already people have been in touch with me to do translations, for example, and other adaptations they would like to do. The clean language thing that this is based on, inspired by, there are 3 clean language books that in my recommended reading list. That again, there's a page that you can read on the website, and they're all references from my recent book. So that's True North and 15-minute FOTO, and we take those outcomes and we organise them into something presentable. And very simple presentation here: short term, medium term, and long term. I'll give you a moment to look at those. So that was discovery. We've got a sense of where we would like to get to. Now we want to pay a bit more closer scrutiny into our current situation. So what we're going to use is the Agendashift values-based delivery assessment. That's an assessment tool. And then the way the results of that are reported back, I will demo to you now. They then prioritize that report using 1, 2, 4 all, which I've already described, and then 15-minute FOTO to generate another set of outcomes. So we run through the assessments, think about what obstacles are preventing us achieve the things that the assessment suggests that you might want to achieve. Those are prioritized, then outcomes generated, and finally we feed that into the Cynefin 4 points contextualisation exercise. So to give you a look at some of those, well, first of all, the benchmarking report. So this is presenting the results of a survey I sent out about a week before the workshop took place, and that's the normal pattern. I do that whether it's a public workshop or a private one. So public workshops, you're typically surveying people who don't know each other, who you've got no way of knowing whether their answers are going to be similar or different, but that's actually an interesting thing to explore. When you do this privately, you might do it for just a small team of people, or you might do it for a whole department. Again, you get a feel for how well different people's answers correlate with each other, areas of agreement, areas of disagreement, and so on. And the tools are designed to make that stuff very visible. So here's our first page of results. On a scale of 1 to 4, most of the prompts are answered with scores of 2 or 3. And it's quite interesting that is the case. The majority of surveys that I've taken, the most common answer is actually 2. So that's at the lower end of the scale. With some more better performing, perhaps more mature teams, you get higher numbers of 3s and 4s. So we've got a bit of both reflected here. And if you look at the categories on the right, transparency, for example, most of the answers, or the most popular answer, 60% of the answers are 3s. Look at balance, on the other hand, and half the answers are 2s. So some quite striking differences there already. We can use a different visualization and see, looking on the right, much stronger answers for leadership and transparency than we're seeing for flow and collaboration. I'll explain the green and the amber colours in a moment. So the strongest categories and prompts: leadership, transparency, customer focus. And my basic question to the room is, are you pleased to see leadership there at the top? Do those 3 seem like a reasonable summary of where you are? And we might spend just a few minutes looking at the top few prompts in that list, but we tend not to dwell on them. There's usually much more interesting things to look at. Similarly, the weakest ones, collaboration, flow and balance, with collaboration looking significantly weaker than the other categories. Does that come as a surprise, as a disappointment? We might look at the top few prompts here again, or perhaps I should say the worst few prompts here again, and just get a sense of why that might be, get some stories about what's going on here, and so on. Now for the greens and ambers. So the greens, these are where the scores are higher than the model would suggest. This isn't higher relative to some average. Some of you may have heard the idea that benchmarking is the pursuit of the mediocre. It's not that. This is unbenchmarking. We have a machine learning model behind this that understands the correlations between scores. And if we had no scorers at all for that first prompt, for prompt 4.2, we would guess, or the model would predict, an answer that would be considerably weaker than the one that we actually got. So we're doing particularly well with, we incorporate customer feedback into our work while it is in the delivery process. So that's good. That's something we can pat ourselves on the back about. And it might be interesting to find out how that came about. And there might be some good stories there to share. Conversely, categories and prompts below profile, we're doing worse than we might expect on collaboration. So it would be interesting to find out why that might be. So for prompt 3.1, we work with those whose needs we are meeting in order to understand, shape and size potential work before committing to deliver it. Why is that a weaker than expected score? That's something we might want to explore. Our delivery process encourages collaboration across roles and specialties again. So already in the collaboration category, 2 surprisingly weak answers. That's possibly worth some further investigation. Then where we have narrow spread of answers, so this is where we have the closest agreement. We've got close agreements on 2 prompts, 2.1 and 3.2, that are areas of weakness. So you could say that we're agreed that they're weak. We're agreed that they're rubbish even. Conversely, 6.1, we're agreed that this is actually a good area. And that's great. There's definitely something positive to take away there. And then the widest spread of scores, and this is actually where we spend the most time. We'll ask, what explains the 3s and 4s? Who'd like to tell us stories about the 3s and 4s? And conversely, the 1s and 2s. What explains the 1s and 2s? What stories prompted answers of 1 and 2, and so on. I'll skip those ones. And then what everyone does, we take the whole survey, take reports on paper, and they prioritize scores. They from their top 5, they think about their obstacles to their top 5, and then they generate outcomes using the 15-minute FOTO game. And back to the deck, they then organize the outcomes using what's called a Cynefin 4 points contextualisation exercise. So this is the output we got in Bengaluru just those couple of weeks ago. It's a bit easier to see on another example where we had a more convenient bit of wall space for the exercise. But you see the clusters around the corners. You see a few stickies sort of between the corners, and the odd sticky in the middle, which is the ones that we couldn't place. So this comes from the Cynefin model that most of you will have come across before. The 4 corners of obvious, complicated, complex, and chaos. Those are the anchors for the 4 domains of the same name, and the domain of disorder in the middle. Now this turns out to be very helpful later when we do hypothesis-driven change, which we do in the afternoon. Hypothesis-driven change or hypothesis-based change is most effective around complex pieces of work. That's areas where there are many different approaches that we could take, and it's very hard to be sure that any of the approaches that we take will take us completely to our outcome in one go. That in turn tells us that we're going to need to iterate our way towards these solutions. So this is the world that Agile is designed to address. And it's also a world where Lean Startup 2 has a lot to teach us. So that was exploration. Then into mapping, and mapping is this only takes a few minutes. We took those stickies from that Cynefin board, and we arranged them on the wall into something that looks like a story map. Now instead of user stories, we have outcomes here. You may have heard of user stories as being a placeholder for a conversation. Now, user stories do include an outcome, so you could say that these are placeholders for a placeholder. You know, we've not actually identified the user story, but we have got the outcome part of the user story. The other essential part of a story map is that there is some kind of journey across the top. In previous iterations of this, I used the original categories of balance, collaboration, transparency, and so on. People didn't know where to start because they all seemed to be going in different directions. So some kind of journey that people can understand is very important. So our journey starts with make simple refinements to existing systems, and it ends with the big picture stuff: pursue fitness for purpose, leadership concerns, big picture organization concerns, and so on. And in between those, just increasing levels of sophistication and challenge. And you can see that some of these have little stars in the corner. Those were the items that were in the top left-hand corner of our Cynefin exercise. So those ones are going to be very suitable for taking forward with hypothesis-based change. Here's another one I've done at a past workshop. This workshop had rather more people in it. We had more than 20 people in the workshop, and they were divided into groups, each doing a column each. And again, in just a few minutes, they were able to produce something with this level of detail. It scales very well, a very efficient, effective tool. Then elaboration. So we're going to do a lean startup style hypothesis, and then we're going to develop that idea a bit further using A3. So the hypothesis, you've all seen the lean startup hypothesis template, or there are a number of them about. So we believe that performing some action will result in some meaningful kind of outcome, and then the impacts that we hope to see through making that change. So in this case, we believe that visualizing work on a physical board will result in improving collaboration. And if successful, we might hope to see team bonding, helping each other, a focus on outcomes and predictability. So that's a nice hypothesis around a change that we all understand. Well, it's a change we all understand, but it's very hard to be sure what the effect of that change is going to be. And the hypothesis and then the A3 help us to explore that in a bit more detail. So we've got the hypothesis area, we've got an area for risks, upside and downside. So the upside risk, that's the 21st century twist on this. You know, the idea that there may be other benefits that we can't plan for, but we're going to keep an eye out for. We'll water those green shoots. We'll transplant, you know, any positive effects from one area of the organisation to another, and so on. So that's why it's helpful, valuable to identify upside risks. Assumptions and dependencies, that's quite a traditional idea. Less traditional, perhaps, is the idea of addressing those assumptions, dependencies, and risks through pilot experiments. So again, this just makes this whole process sort of recursive. As soon as you've got an assumption to test, then we'll think of up another experiment that more cheaply, faster, and safer than the experiment as a whole. We will test that assumption or address that. We then consider people. It's very easy to get excited about the technical stuff, you know, the hypothesis and the risk and so on, and forget that change involves people. And it's a very important discipline to identify who those people are, both in terms of their role, but actually even to give actual names to them. Now, in a public workshop, we didn't put people's names on, but we did identify the kinds of people involved, and we considered which of those, you know, actually had a veto on the whole thing, and so on. Lastly, we think about insights. Now, insights are where we capture the results of our experiments. You might think it odd that we've written some in already, but what we're actually doing, we're imagining the insights we would like, and that's a very good test on our experiment. Is our experiment capable of delivering the insights that we want? And if it's not, we haven't designed it correctly. That's just a last check. And finally, operation. And the basic idea here is treating change as real work. And this session of the workshop has two benefits. One is it's a way to recap some of the work that we've done already, or to practice again some of the tools that we've used. But it's also a way of getting people thinking about how to take this stuff forward. We actually want to make some changes. Let's treat change like real work. Make sure we've got the systems in place to help us manage it effectively, and so on. So the way we do that, we run another assessment, which I won't show you for interest of time, but it's an adaptability assessment rather than a delivery assessment. And just like we did before, we prioritize the prompts on that assessment. We think about what obstacles are in the way of those prompts. We generate outcomes for those, and we end up with some more stickies that we put on the wall. But instead of that taking several long exercises most of the morning as it did for delivery, we're actually doing this very informally, looking at the reports. I'm standing there with a pad of stickies, and just in moments, we're generating more outcomes to put on the board. So this is just I think it's the two yellow stickies in the third and fourth columns are the ones that were added. Maybe a few more. So that's the updated transformation map at the end of that exercise. And then finally, to wrap up, an exercise called Full Circle. So all we did, we just used the Agendashift house style as a way of getting people to articulate what it is they would like to have happen, what they hope to see in their organizations after this work has been done. So the house style is inclusive. So that's why they all start with the word we, or they might start with the word our. They're in the present tense. You know, we're not just stating an aspiration. We're describing a reality we hope that will be in place for us quite soon. And they're non-prescriptive. They don't say how. Just remember that principle. If we have agreement on outcomes, then the rest is easy. Now it's just about the how. Not in the business of selling practices. So that's the whole workshop. I don't know how long we took for that. But that's the whole workshop in a few minutes. Just some resources to mention. So that's the open source stuff, the 15-minute photo, the A3 template, and some other things as well. You'll find under resources at agendashift.com. The reading, for example, for clean language, but for a whole load of other things as well. There's a LinkedIn group and a Slack community for all of this stuff. And the website will take you directly to the LinkedIn group. In the case of Slack, I need to invite you, so you can request me to send you an invite. Finally, the partner program, that's how you get access to the assessment tools and the workshop materials and so on. So if that's of interest to you, then check that out. And there is a free trial version of the assessment tool as well, with a smaller assessment. Last but not least, don't forget the book. So it's out on LeanPub. Not yet made it to Amazon, but that is obviously the plan. Yeah, love you obviously to read that. I think I'm done. I think next we have questions, but I'll hand back to Chirag.
Yes, you can drop your own question if you have any. So I think we are done. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much, entire audience, for being there. Thank you so much, my Burrows, for a fantastic webinar. So if you have any question, you can drop an email to Mike as well as me. You can catch us on Twitter as well. So thank you so much. Have a great day ahead. Thank you, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you.